Hi guys! So in this video, I want to talk to you about how to write an introduction in a thesis statement, give you some reminders of things that we've talked about throughout the year. If you watched the last video, you know that we are working with this prompt, which is in a well-developed essay, discuss how the use of diction, detail, imagery, syntax, and/or figurative language helps to develop Hugo's opinion of the Thénardier family. And then we're also working with this short passage from the book Les Miserables. For your paper that you are writing, you are going to be focusing on an entire novel, not just a passage. So keep that in mind as we're working. My sample is a passage analysis, not a true character analysis throughout an entire novel. So the first thing that we need to do in our introduction is to think of some sort of hook, something to draw readers in to make them more interested to read our paper. And if we go back to our outline, we know that that is going to come first in our introduction. I know that in especially junior high, you're taught several different ways to write a hook, and of course you can use some of those, but I wanted to go through with you some that I find more applicable and maybe better for more formal high school writing. So the first thing that I think you could do to draw your readers in with a hook is to use some sort of context. So a note about historical context or author background or something like that. Let's label this so you know. Hooks. I think historical context is interesting, and I think that a lot of the times it's pretty relevant for what you're writing about. Now, if you're writing about a novel that the historical context doesn't particularly matter, that would not be a good choice for the hook then. But if you're writing about like something like To Kill a Mockingbird, where the historical context of the novel is incredibly important, then yeah, it's a good idea to talk about some of those issues that were happening at the time that were relevant to the characters in the novel. Another thing that you can do is to surprise people with a misconception. What that means is that if you have a character who is interesting because they kind of like break the rules, right? They don't follow these prescribed trajectories that we would normally think of typical characters, then use that information as a hook. Tell me what makes this character so special and so unique. And then another thing that I think could be, pretty useful is to draw a scene. Not literally, please don't draw on your papers. But what I mean by that is give me something that sounds pretty. So if I were writing a paper about Obasan and I wanted to talk about Naomi, I could begin my paper with actually very similarly to the way the actual novel begins, which is to maybe describe her sitting lonely in the coulee as the wind blows through all of the foliage around her, representing the isolation yet serenity she feels throughout her life. So use some of those descriptive words. Be a little creative. That would be a really good place for you to do something like that. Okay, so I think those are 3 really good ways to write a hook. There are some ways that I would ask you to avoid if possible. Again, I understand the constraints of life right now, and if you don't feel comfortable reaching too far and you want to stick to something that is going to help you personally, then that is fine. But I did want to go ahead and list these so that you can at least try to maybe push yourselves a little bit. Hooks to avoid. These are things that are just done too often. They're super formulaic, they're super predictable and generic, and they don't really lend anything of use to your paper. The first is to ask a question. This is one of my biggest pet peeves. I don't like reading papers that ask rhetorical questions. I think that you should avoid rhetorical questions in every single part of your paper, not just the hook. Please do not question me. Okay, ask a question. I think that you should avoid definitions. So if your paper is about how brave your character is, please don't open it up with a Merriam dictionary defines courage as blah, blah, blah. I know what those words mean, and I don't need you to tell me what they mean. Okay, next is quotes. I don't believe that quotes have a place in your introduction. I think that you should save quotes from your novel for the body paragraphs, and I think that you should just not include quotes from other sources unless your author said something very, very interesting that is related to their novel. But even then, I think you could probably avoid that and write something a little bit better. And then I don't think that it's a good idea in this case to start with statistics or anything numerical, because this is a literary analysis. This isn't a technical paper, and so it's not going to work in something like this. So just some of the hooks to avoid. Again, if it makes you feel comfortable to write using those hooks, then for this paper at this time, that's okay. But I do think that there are some better options in these 3 hooks. Okay, so once you have your hook, then I do think it is helpful to provide some sort of transition from your hook to your thesis. That would make your introduction 3 to 4 sentences long, which would probably come out to be, I don't know, close to 100 words if we're writing, well-developed, interesting sentences. And that's where you probably want to be at number-wise for your introduction in order to reach that minimum requirement for the paper. But don't let numbers, bother you too much. Don't get hung up on the numbers. They're not the most important thing here. So once we have our hook, and then we have some information of context, which would be a really good place to add your gate information. Remember, again, that is genre, author, title, and era. You need that somewhere in your introduction, and in the context, that's a great place to put it. Now, we need to go into our thesis. Our thesis is perhaps the single most important sentence of this paper, and so we really need it to be impactful. We need it to have a lot of meaning, and we need it to make sense. So there are a couple ways that you can write a thesis. All year, I have been telling you a very formulaic way to write a thesis, and that is still okay in 9th grade. But I do want you to know that beginning next year in 10th grade, and then obviously in the later years of your high school career, you are not going to be able to get away with that formulaic thesis. We do it in 9th grade because this is a transition year, right? Going from what you learned in junior high to now a much more rigorous environment in high school. And we use these little training wheels, we use these baby steps to help us learn how to write effectively instead of just throwing it all at you at once and hoping that you can understand it. We use the baby steps, the training wheels instead. I think now, because it's the end of the year, it would be a great time for you to try to step away from that and to take those training wheels off and write a little bit more sophisticatedly. Is sophisticatedly a word? It sounds wrong. Okay, so if you want to stick with the formula, that is okay. So I will write it here for you. Formulaic thesis. And obviously there are a bunch of different ways that you could reword this sentence and kind of move things around, but I'm just going to give you one here. So we could say and these are very basic words. Again, feel free to improve them, use better quality words. use a thesaurus, but don't use it too much because you will probably end up with words you don't understand. So by using blank and then your device, this needs to be a descriptive adjective. And this is another adjective, device, author, in his or her era, genre, title, suggests that character is blank adjective yet adjective, or adjective and adjective, something like that. So by using blank device and blank device, the author in his whatever book suggests that whatever the character is blank and blank, or blank yet blank. That is very, very formulaic, but it does meet the requirements of what a thesis needs to have. It has all of the gate information, it is a complete sentence, it is only one sentence, and it has both parts of the prompt. Remember, we need to have our devices, 2 to 3 of them, and how Hugo feels about the Thénardiers. And I'm just going to abbreviate this here. Okay, so very, very formulaic thesis. That is okay. I don't think that you have to stick to that though, so I am going to show you my introduction with thesis, and we'll go over where everything is and how everything is working together. Okay, so this here is my intro. Let me read it for you. Misery rears its hideous head in a myriad of fashions, but none so destructive and damning as that of base wretchedness. It is this psychological state romantic author Victor Hugo focuses on in his novel of post-revolutionary propaganda Les Miserables. As he addresses the Thénardier family, wicked urchins existing in this particular state of permanent ill repute, Hugo emphasizes the deplorably evil nature of the family and the utter darkness of the human soul, ultimately suggesting that those poor few like the Thénardiers remain incapable of redemption and eternally cursed to trudge through the nadir of society. Okay, I have a very particular writing style that uses a lot of very, very long sentences. I'm very much Hugo-esque. I like things to be a little long-winded. That is not necessarily a good thing. A lot of the times it's much better to be concise. But this is just my particular writing style that I have developed over the years. So look past that for now. And again, this is not by any means super well polished or well developed, but it will work for now. Okay, so this first sentence, misery rears its hideous head in a myriad of fashions, but none so destructive and damning as that of base wretchedness. That is my hook. I just think it sounds nice. I think if I picked up a paper that had that as the first sentence, I would be intrigued. I would be able to tell that my paper is going to be about misery, and I would also be able to tell that whatever character I'm talking about deals with base wretchedness. Base meaning like bottom. So I like my hook here. I think that it's a little unique. It's not super formulaic, but it does go ahead and tell me what my paper is going to be about, which is the idea of a hook. Okay. It is this psychological state romantic author Victor Hugo focuses on in his novel of post-revolutionary propaganda, Les Miserables. All right, this is my sentence of background information that gives me all of the gate stuff. So we have era with our author, we have genre, and we have title. Remember that titles, when you're typing, need to be italicized. Okay, so we have all of our gate information there, and it also talks about this psychological state, which goes back to this idea of misery, which will come up in my paper a lot. All right, and then we have my thesis. Again, this is a long thesis. probably too long, but it is only one sentence. It's grammatically correct, and it does meet all of the goals that I set for myself when I write a thesis. So it says, as he addresses the Thénardier family, which gives me some context. It sets the scene. Wicked urchins existing in this particular state of permanent ill repute. So here I have defined who they are, literally. Hugo emphasizes the deplorably evil nature of the family and the utter darkness of the human soul. Okay, so here I get a better idea about their personalities, more context on personality, and it again suggests what I will be writing about in my paper. And then this last part down here, ultimately suggesting that those poor few like the Thénardiers remain incapable of redemption and eternally cursed to trudge through the nadir of society. So here I have Hugo's opinion of Thénardiers. And remember, that is one of those parts of the prompt that we talked about up here. Now you will notice in my introduction, in my thesis, I did not include a listing of the devices that I'm going to discuss in my paper. That is okay. In fact, that is preferred. It is a much better idea to not include those words like diction or syntax in your thesis. I have taught you to do that in 9th grade, again, because it's a training wheel. It is a way to help you stay organized and remember what you need to keep going back to as you write your paper. But in 10th, 11th, 12th grade, college, you do not need to state in your thesis your devices. Please, 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 going forward after this paper, it is not a good idea to list things. So now would be a great time to try to write your thesis on your own without listing those devices. You can still kind of get hints of what I'm going to talk about with regards to those devices in my introduction, because I am talking about their deplorably evil nature. I'm talking about how they're incapable of redemption, which are things that I'm going to be discussing through diction and through the syntax and through the analysis that I'm giving on those two devices. But again, they don't have to be listed in your introduction, and it's actually better if they aren't. Okay, so hopefully this was helpful. In the next video, I'm going to go over with you how to do your body paragraphs, what I'm looking for in terms of analysis, and I will let you read my 2 body paragraphs over diction and syntax. So I will see you then.